We're hello. We're considering canceling the event and just networking all morning. Welcome everyone. Welcome everyone. It's really exciting to be here with everyone. Most of you know me, and I'm really excited to convene in person with so many thought leaders. And what I want to do is just share a couple of thoughts and reflections as we come off, and we're going to jump right into the program. I'm just so appreciative of everyone being here. We intentionally did not live stream this. We're here in person. This is a wonderful opportunity to convene in person. So many of us haven't done that for so long. But we are recording this just for everyone to know, and this will be available for public access, and we're going to archive this in the Georgetown Library because it's such an important moment to come together. And I want to just extend a huge thank you to a number of organizations. We're receiving funding from the Georgetown Global Cities Initiative. We're really excited to have this partnership with the Social Life Project, and Steve is here somewhere. And unfortunately, Fred Kent and Kathy Madden aren't here today, but are with us in spirit. Really grateful to the Embassy of Poland and the Polish Cultural Institute that has helped us in conceptualizing this. And we also are here in partnership with our environment initiative at the university, the Georgetown Earth Commons. We literally would not be here without Savannah Elpers, who has done an amazing job of getting us organized. Tyler, I don't know where Tyler is. I think she's still outside. And Dave Curry, who is fearless in helping us get organized in the digital space. So thank you to everyone. And so let me just say a few words really quickly about the project. This is all about place management organizations. And I think a lot of us know and maybe use this term, but this is still an emerging term within the practice. And so when I say PMO, you say, but it is that kind of a moment where the practices are changing, and we can't just go around calling everything a bid anymore. There is this incredible wave of practice that is place-based, led professionally by organizations, and so we think this is just a very important issue within cities. And the issue of place is not just local. It is local, and we'll be talking about it in the local context today. But this issue has risen in significance to the level of the United Nations as the United Nations engages cities around the world. And while in this room we have incredible leaders from across our region, there are many more across our region, and there are many across the country. We think there's, or at least the IDA has estimated that there are 2,500 types, different organizations that are working locally in a place management fashion. So here we are. We've been convening for a couple of years now on this project, and putting my kind of academic hat on, this is community-based participatory research. So we're not in the ivory tower working with big data sets. We're on the ground, we're engaged with the professional community, thinking about not just the outcomes, but the process that leads to outcomes. And even just in the Washington metropolitan region, we have so many examples of leadership. It's amazing at all different scales. Today, we've intentionally convened some of the largest, most sophisticated organizations in the region, but there are many, many more working at a local level and kind of creating place across the metro region. We think there's about 150 of these different kinds of organizations, and you can go to the website and see the kind of proposed taxonomy that we've created to identify different PMOs. And as we move forward in this conversation, we basically have three assumptions that we're using as a point of departure. The first is that, as I mentioned before, this is a really important emerging area of professional practice. Yes, and I'm thinking about many conversations that we've had with Fred Kent about this. Yes, there are wonderful volunteer initiatives. There are communities coming together, using place as a way of advancing community development. But there's a higher level of organization that's being expressed in so many organizations, new governance frameworks, and Chris Lineberger is here, we'll hear from him later, thinking and conceptualizing and strategically placing local governance as an important element of metropolitan governance. Secondly, and I was mentioning to Mercedes before, especially the CEOs in the room of place management organizations, you are born problem solvers. You wake up in the morning and all of you have long lists of problems that you're going to solve that day. And what's amazing is that you have another list of problems the next day that you move on to. However, part of the reason why we think Georgetown has a role in this conversation is that we need to reflect on the innovation that is actually being advanced and think about it in a regional, national, and indeed a global context, because what is happening here in the Washington metro region is of global significance. And then lastly, and this kind of goes to the DNA of why we even would go to the length of hard work and effort to get organized locally, and that is that a kind of a status quo of urban performance is unacceptable. All of these place management organizations are seeking to do more, seeking to perform at a higher level, seeking to deliver services at a higher level, and create kind of an urban livable environment that is attractive. And just almost by definition, it being attractive means that it's kind of working at a higher level, it's outperforming. And so there's this kind of aspirational and mission-based set of activities associated with PMOs that we just assume as part of this conversation. So here's what we're going to do today. We're so honored to have Mercedes with us, who's going to offer some reflections at kind of an international perspective. We're going to move into kind of a table setting exercise where Professor McCarthy and Steve Davies are going to talk to us about kind of where the kind of practice innovation stands. And then kind of the heart of our morning is really hearing directly from different place management organizations about the important work that they've been doing through the pandemic, through the health emergency. And then we're going to end on a note of reflection of trying to situate this conversation and situate our networks in this region in a larger context. I just want to thank everyone for being here again. It's just so exciting to be in person, so many friendly faces that we've seen on Zoom, and it's so great to to be able to be here. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Mercedes Garcia Perez. Mercedes' job, you have a great job, by the way. So she is the head of innovation and global issues, and works at the European Union's delegation to the United States. Mercedes, thank you so much for being here today. And I'll give you this mic, and if you want to stand at the podium, it's up to you.
Yeah, I can stay here since we thank you so much, and thanks for the very kind introduction, and for the invitation to speak to you today. I'm really honored to be here on your first event in person. I know how special those moments are. They certainly have been for me. We were at home like everybody else, and came back early because we think diplomacy is a contact sport, like our ambassador likes to say. And you know, to create those relationships and to create those partnerships across the Atlantic, which is our job here in DC. Ideally, you need to do it in person. We did it over Zoom online for a number of months because there was no other way, but we're very, very happy to be in person as well again. My job, as we were saying, is really amazing. I had a very talented group of people that are experts on issues such as, you know, the oceans, environment, biodiversity, circular economy, energy, which is a big crisis for us at the moment, and I'll be talking about that too a little bit. Climate, of course, and also we have a team dealing with research and innovation that are here representing our research director general. We have colleagues dealing with transport issues, and I know a number of you are transport professionals. My dad actually was, for his entire life, transport professional, and so my dinner table conversations were about, you know, planning and accidents and all sorts of things that needed to be solved. So I think I know, and I share some of the. Well, I think I'm well placed to understand the mindset that many of you have to work on an everyday basis. Today, I'd like to talk a little bit about climate. Of course, a lot going on in that sphere, about innovation, about the role of cities in all of this, a little bit about the pandemic, which I don't think is entirely over, and the role of innovation there as well. A little bit about the values that we share on research and innovation across the Atlantic. And I'd love to also have a conversation. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to tell me. So, well, climate first. We are about to go into another COP, as you know, the COPs, the conferences of the parties. This year it takes place in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt. Last year it took place in Glasgow. So this year was the year of implementation. So I think the big job will be to see, and this is also very familiar to your practices. Okay, we promised a lot of things last year, but how much have we achieved? How much can we demonstrate that we have things moving forward? And there's an array of reports coming out this week to sort of demonstrate that. And there's a particularly worrying one that is not strictly about climate. It's the World Wide Fund report on biodiversity. And the headline there is very, very sad. We've lost 69% of biodiversity worldwide in the last 50 years. Which is kind of scary, and we need to get much better at that, among other things. And you might have heard this before, but of course the biodiversity crisis is linked to the climate crisis. The better we preserve, and this is something you do, many of you do every day, the better we preserve our green spaces, the better we can continue to capture carbon and so that it doesn't get into the atmosphere. Innovation is also deeply linked to this because I spent part of the week in New York talking about space and sustainability, and you probably don't even realize on an everyday basis, but a lot of the data points that we use to be able to demonstrate results to our commitments actually come from space, from satellites. So how do we measure, for example, last year, one of the things we promised in Glasgow is that there was a global methane pledge that was about reducing global emissions of methane by 30% by 2030. Methane, for those who are not in the energy business, is a very potent pollutant. It's actually, it warms the earth more than CO2 and quicker, but it also disappears from the atmosphere much quicker than CO2. So if you are able to curb methane emissions quickly, as we promised we will do, then the effects on warming are also quicker. So that's why this was a very significant undertaking that we took in Glasgow. So how do we measure that? Well, there's an international methane emissions observatory under the UN. It sits in Paris under UNEP. We're trying to use space technology. We have a program in the European Union called Copernicus that uses space technology to check many things: sea level rise, carbon emissions, methane emissions, all sorts of things. The density of the canopy, that would be one that you will look at if you're a city planner. And we will be able to tell by 2030 whether these global emissions of methane have actually gone down to by the amounts that we promised ourselves we would do so. So climate, of course, is very much linked to what you do as city professionals. I've been delighted to see many of those conversations in practice. The European Union was the co-founder with Bloomberg of the Global Covenant of Mayors, which I assume you're familiar with, but if not, is basically a global organization of cities that decided to mobilize themselves for climate. And it was a beautiful moment, and I think it continues to be, because it's really one of those examples of city diplomacy that have gotten the global stage and they got the global attention as well. And they deserve it, because you might not realize on an everyday basis, but you do work on improving the climate, probably on most of what you do. We have a couple of programs to support that. One is, of course, we finance the Global Covenant of Mayors here in the Americas, and we have a number of professionals. So one thing we've done, and which I'm very proud of and has benefited DC directly, is help a number of metro regions, 5 of them in the US and many others in other regions, to put together their climate action plans. And I was delighted to see, I went to one of their events in Kansas City recently, and the fact that these metro regions had a plan, actually, I was told by the professionals there, have put them in a better position to start applying, for example, for the money that was in the infrastructure bill that was approved last year, and will probably also put them in a better position to apply for grants from the IRA. The Inflation Reduction Act that has just been approved, and it's the most significant climate legislation in the US so far. So we are very proud that we've been able to contribute to this in a concrete way. And of course, there's been many events organized to share good practice. The ones in Kansas City were mostly about building sustainability. That's where Kansas City has an edge. And we visited a number of projects that are working in that space. So making sustainable and affordable housing the norm, I think, is a big part also of contributing against the rising temperatures because of climate change. The other program that we have in that space is the International Urban how is it called? IURC, International Urban Cities, and this is really pairing of cities across the Atlantic. So we have a number of cities cooperating together on all sorts of projects, but many of them, of course, have chosen to focus on climate. So, for example, San Diego officials recently visited in Madrid, in Spain, to look at transportation projects and to look at nature-based solutions and planning, city planning, urban planning with nature-based solutions integrated. We've had colleagues traveling from here, from the region, the wider metro region, to Stuttgart in Germany. We've had all sorts of these pairings, Italian cities, especially in the north of Italy, also very involved in this program. And places like Kansas City, which I mentioned already, Chicago also got a prize for their urban planning. So it's been really a fantastic process of seeing cities share best practice across the Atlantic. And the last things of a more practical nature I would like to mention in this space is that we've also been very happy to organize more targeted missions to visit in Europe to see best practice on a number of areas. The last one we organized was last summer on circular economy. So we had a number of city officials and also importantly, I think, local legislators, so state legislators coming to, and we had one member of Congress also spending 10 days in Brussels and in the Netherlands, looking at what solutions we have there. And we've organized these visits also in other areas, not only with local counterparts. For example, we had a number of members of Congress looking at energy solutions in Sweden. We were able to show them, for example, a plant that does steel. Steel is something that consumes a lot of energy, but there's a plant in north of Sweden that uses hydropower, then transforms it into heat and therefore doesn't need to use any fossil fuels to produce steel, which is obviously an important innovation that can hopefully be replicated in other places as well. So this is basically what we try to do at both the political level and the very practical level. At the higher level, of course, we have an excellent relationship with the US, preparing now for the COP. We have what we call a high-level climate action group. This is basically your senior special envoy for climate, John Kerry, that meets with Executive Vice President Timmermans, who's our top person on climate. He's the Vice President of the European Commission. And they discuss, they strategize, they compare notes on how they reach out to other partners, because the EU and the US are very aligned now on climate, but of course, we only represent so much of the global emissions. In the case of Europe, is now below 8% of global emissions, and we need to convince others. If we are very proud that we will be climate neutral, we think, by 2050 or even before. We've put this into law. We have a climate law that says we are going to be climate neutral in 2050. We have put to our parliament a number of pieces of legislation that's called Fit for 55, which is not a is not, as people like to joke, some sort of gym program. Is actually how do we get to 55% of emission reduction by 2030? And that is legislation that affects everything from electric vehicles to transportation to buildings, targets in reducing emissions in electricity. And it also includes, interestingly, and this has gotten a lot of attention here in the US, a carbon border mechanism. And that's to make sure that the goods that we import in the future in the EU do not carry a carbon price that we're not ready to pay in the European Union. So we'll basically, if those goods have more carbon footprint than the ones that we produce in Europe, for a selected number of products, we will charge them a fee when they enter into the European Union. This is basically so that we don't end up exporting our carbon emissions to other places. So that is a nice segue, I guess, to move on to something I also wanted to mention today. As you know, all of our climate ambitions are happening against the backdrop of the invasion of Ukraine. Ukraine is our neighbor. They have applied for European Union membership, and we have started that process together with them. And this crisis has basically has consequences all over Europe in many ways. We've had initially a huge wave of refugees, as you saw in the news. All of these people were hosted by their neighbors in Moldova, which is not a member of the European Union, but they were very generous as well. In Poland, in some of them also in Germany, in the Czech Republic, in Hungary. Most of them were actually hosted by normal citizens like you and me that opened their houses to these people who were just crossing the border because of the war. And the European Union has mobilized itself alongside its partners. So also the US has done a huge effort in helping Ukraine go through this crisis, and we're grateful for that. But that war continues as we speak today. Many cities in Ukraine have been affected by it, have been shelled, have been bombed. And this has had, and that's also the reason I mention it, huge consequences for energy prices in Europe. And some had put into questions the climate ambitions of Europe in that context. So what I can tell and share with you today is that actually what's going to happen is the opposite. There will be an acceleration of our move towards renewables, because we've seen the urgency of decoupling from Russian oil and gas. So at the beginning, so before this war, we imported 40% of our gas from Russia, and it was pipeline gas through the pipelines in the north. And now we are only importing, I think it's about 8 or 7%. So we've already, in a few months, we've managed to decouple from Russian dependency. A lot of it has been thanks to the US exporting more LNG to Europe. So we're grateful for that. The prices are a bit crazy at the moment, so I don't think we can sustain this for many months. Some families in Europe are finding it difficult to pay their electricity bills. And we're looking into that also by providing financing directly to make sure that those families can pay their bills. And we're doing three things, basically. We're decoupling from Russian gas and oil, as I just said. We are accelerating our energy transition, so investing more in renewables. And we're saving. We've also discovered that you can actually save electricity, and you can save. And I think that's something at the level that you work, in your current experience. I know it's a bit less in the minds of the American public, saving electricity. But I think if you can actually speak to people's imagination when you tell them, okay, you're just not doing it for yourself to save a little bit of money. You're doing it because it's needed, because we are in a crisis situation, because there's a war going on, and every bit of oil and gas that you save is not only for your own benefit, it's obviously for the benefit of the community, for the benefit of the climate, and it actually helps in a global way to lower prices and to increase the amount of energy that is out there that can be consumed by others. So those are the things that we have been doing around energy. The program is called Repower EU. And we constantly discuss this with our American partners as well. We have a number of working groups and task forces to discuss energy security. There was an existing EU-US Energy Council that has existed for 10 years. We meet at ministerial level on an annual basis. Your Secretary of State and our High Representative on the political side, and of course, your Energy Secretary, Granholm, and our Energy Commissioner, Simpson, are involved in those meetings. But then throughout the year, we continue to communicate on the actual situations that are happening, whether it's, most recently we discussed Moldova and other countries in the region. So that's that. And then I also wanted to say something briefly about the pandemic. The pandemic, unfortunately, is not over. Most of these consequences are for us, and we are able to meet in person because of that today. And I mean, you know this, but I just wanted to bring to your attention the fact that we've been able to recover so quickly from a pandemic like this is also the result of transatlantic innovation. It was a German company, BioNTech, actually run by Turkish scientists originally from Turkey. They were German, but originally from Turkey, that had the mRNA technology already for a number of years. And Pfizer here in the US had, which is, it has a lot of European in the leadership, and is run by a CEO who was born in Greeks, as he likes to remind us when we meet him. They got together and they decided they were going to try this. Had never been tried. It was an amazing leap of faith. And I don't know if you've heard this, but when the scientists and the CEOs, the people who really decide, receive the results of the efficacy of those vaccines, which was, I think it was 95 or 96% or something, they first thought, really? Because normally vaccines are like 40%, 60% efficacy, if you're lucky. So this was really an amazing undertaking. Everything was accelerated. Every person that worked on these files, whether on the public sector, to make sure that everything was approved on time, that everything was looked into. The European Medicine Agency worked very closely with your FDA colleagues here, and we were basically able to have vaccines in a few months, which is, everybody would have thought was going to be a miracle beforehand. So I think it's really something that we should remind ourselves of, that we have agency, and that innovation can happen and can take us out of some of the worst problems and challenges that we have. I think that's going to be true also for the climate. And if you read between the lines and of the many reports that are being published and will be published these days, we're not yet on a trajectory to reach 1.5, but we can get there, and basically through innovation. It's not by continuing to do what we are already doing. We need to get used to new forms of energy, to, in some ways, also some new behaviors. But I think it's important to not to let people think that this is their own responsibility, their own individual. We can do a lot at an individual level, but it also requires clearly planning and commitment at the political level. And we're starting to see that on a bigger dimension. And of course, we're also starting to see the private sector mobilizing itself at a level that we hadn't seen before, investing in green technologies and moving towards that. What we're not yet seeing that really needs to happen as well is that seeing those investments go abroad. Because as I mentioned before, the EU and the US don't really represent the bulk of emissions. The bulk of emissions is represented by the rest of the G20, especially some countries in that group. So we need to see those technologies also in some other countries. And hopefully that's going to happen in Sharm el-Sheikh. More countries in that emerging economies will step up and make that leap of faith to say, yes, we think this is going to work for us as well. And it's difficult because some of these companies like mines and carbon mines have employed hundreds, thousands of people over the years. And it's difficult for a government to say, look, no, you're going to lose all those jobs, but don't worry, we're going to get new jobs in another sort of technology. So that will hopefully also happen more and more. And for that to happen, we need to demonstrate that those technologies have already worked for us. It's easier to adopt them when you've already seen that they work. And we need to also ideally be able to contribute to the financing abroad. And we've seen the acceleration of the prices going down for solar, for wind. So hopefully that will also happen in other more innovative technologies like hydrogen that we will depend on in the future. I wanted to say two more things briefly. One about the role of academia and institutions. I mean, we're here hosted by Georgetown University, so I think it's very fitting to say that. We all need to think about how we educate this and the next generation for the professions of the future and for this amazing moment that we're living together. So we are basically living through an industrial revolution that is different from the one we saw in the 19th century and the 20th century, but is going to transform the world we live in. So the professions that people in this room studied a few years ago are not necessarily the ones that are going to be needed in the future. I spent also part of my week with nuclear companies, the new ones, fusion and small nuclear reactors are being built and are being experimented. What they tell us is that they cannot hire all of the people they need because there's either not enough people that know the business well enough, or that there's just not well known that they need those professionals. So I think the role of academia in innovation is not always recognized. I think this institute is clearly doing a great job at putting together great minds to accelerate that innovation. I think more of that is also needed. And I wanted to end on values. I think the great thing about the transatlantic partnership, and again, I think the war in Ukraine has put that into the spot, is that we share fundamental values. We stand for freedom, for human rights, for global governance that is not based on who's the strongest and who has more powers and more nukes, but on a global governance that we want to preserve. So it's an important moment for the transatlantic relationship. And I think those values also need to be reflected in innovation and science. We need to make sure that the next generation of innovators is diverse, includes all that want to participate in it in society. We need to make sure that it's open, that it's accessible, and that it preserves those values. We need to make sure that those conducts that are illegal offline are also illegal online. If if hate speech, which is illegal in Europe, is illegal, then it should also be illegal online. So these reflections on what's the future, what does the future hold, and how we want to shape that future, need to be informed by those values that we share across the Atlantic. And I'll end with that. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. So if any